I'd like to warmly welcome each of you to Gems from the Wisdom Tradition today, when we are taking up the discussion of going beyond pleasure and pain. This is a very appropriate discussion to look at from the perspective of Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. The reason that I asked Cliff to give us a starter presentation on this subject is that he is somebody who sleeps with the Bhagavad Gita on his nightstand. And I look over and see him read a little bit of it every night before going to sleep. And I thought, oh, you know, that's the right guy to talk on this subject. And so I would like to introduce Cliff Tillotson, who's going to speak to us on this very profound topic of going beyond pleasure and pain.
Well, this is my first time to do something like this on a Zoom conference or whatever. But I thought, Renee, you asked me to do this topic because compared to Nia, a lot of the activities I do, she thinks more I'm a glutton for punishment. And it's true, I guess maybe I am a little bit of a masochist and kind of believe in the saying that no pain, no gain. So, but anyways, in starting to think about the subject of pain and pleasure, it's kind of a difficult subject because we're experiencing often one or the other of those two things, and one or the other of those two feelings, and yet those feelings are often entangled with our thoughts too. I was thinking it's actually even harder than to see your nose with your eyes. Your nose is so close to your eyes, it's hard to see it unless you look in a mirror. But to think about pleasure and pain, when the feelings of pleasure and pain are also tied up with your thoughts, is even more difficult. But I guess that's what self-reflection is kind of for, to help us really somehow gain a perspective on these feelings. With, I guess, the goal with the premise of the talk, which is to go beyond pleasure and pain, means that it's possible. I think that's what she's saying in this title, is that there's the possibility to go beyond pleasure and pain. Well, what does that mean, to go beyond pleasure and pain? Does it mean that we would no longer feel pleasure and pain, or does it mean that we would experience those feelings in a different way? And kind of the more I thought about the subject, it seemed like it was more the latter, that we would still feel them, but we would feel them in a kind of a different way. Some other questions that kind of came to mind was what is the difference between pain and suffering? And I do think there is a distinction. And what is the difference also between pleasure and happiness? And again, I think we can make a distinction between those two as well. And another background question I have is, what is true contentment? That also seems to be beyond pleasure and pain. Renee and I, just to do a plug, have become incredibly fond of a BBC series called Call the Midwife. And we've been watching it like every night. We're kind of addicted during the shutdown to watching Call the Midwife. It's a show I didn't think I'd ever be interested in, but we're finding it to be fantastic, actually. But in that show, there's one or two births every show. And so there's a lot of pain with mothers bringing children into the world, but also simultaneously, there's so much joy and happiness. So it's really interesting to see both the possibility of having experiencing a tremendous amount of pain while at the same time experiencing a tremendous amount of happiness. And I've also seen this true in my work. When I used to do a lot of landscaping work in Santa Barbara, California, I used to do a lot of work for very rich people, like in Malibu or in Santa Barbara. There's a couple of rich communities called Hope Ranch and Montecito. And I found that these people can have, they're very, very wealthy, and they can have any kind of pleasure their money would buy. And then I found them to be, a lot of times, experiencing a great deal of suffering. So it seems to me that you could actually be experiencing pleasure on the outside while suffering on the inside. So you could actually have those two things going on simultaneously. It seems to me that pleasure and pain are more like feelings, whereas suffering and happiness are more like states, emotional states. So you could have a feeling on one side, say pleasure, but be on the other side, being in an emotional state of suffering. So there's this exercise I do with myself that I thought I would try out with you guys as an experiment. I do it with myself sometimes just because it helps me kind of get perspective on a different aspects of my nature. And I've done it with some people before. I think I might have done it with Vina once before. It's kind of a silly exercise, but it helps me kind of align different aspects of my being, because it's interesting about human beings in that a lot of times we'll take these most amazing and wonderful and mysterious parts of the world we live in, and we'll make them very commonplace. And I was thinking, like, a lot of times here in Hawaii, if you drive up into Manoa Valley, you'll see rainbows, which are, when you see a rainbow, you should be like amazed. They're just like the most amazing thing. But you're just driving up into Manoa Valley and you go, oh, ho hum, there's another rainbow over on the right. There's another rainbow over on the left. And these most mysterious and amazing things become commonplace. But by doing this exercise, what I'm trying to do is the opposite. I'm trying to take something that's very, very commonplace and reinfuse it with mystery and wonder. So what I'd like to do is ask you all in your own way, just to simply move one of your hands in front of your camera. I'm not going to do it because then I'll influence how you move it. So however you feel like doing it, just move one of your hands. And now come on, everybody do it. There you go. Bob, I got to see your hand. Where's your hand, Bob? Robert Moore. Oh, maybe you can't hear.
I think he can. He's got a.
Okay, you can stop. But what I found was really interesting is each of you moved your hand in a different way. So you each chose in a different way to move your hand. If I start moving mine, you might move it exactly the same way that I did. So in that very common activity that we do, we move our hands all day long. Let's take a really deep dive into that, what we just did in moving our hand. In doing that, I think you could say that there's two very distinct aspects of our being, our nature. There is the hand, and there is that which moved the hand. And so the way I would describe it is you have that which is moved, which is the hand, and then this other part of our being, this more mysterious part, I think, which I call the mover, that which is moving the hand. But even if you just take a look at the hand and the moving of the hand alone, it's mysterious. It's incredibly mysterious. There's 27 bones, I Googled it, in the hand that are moving when you move the hand, as well as all these tendons and ligaments and nerves and blood vessels, and all that's going on in the physiology of moving the hand, which I really don't understand anything about. But then there's all this when you turn and start to look at the mover of the hand, there is a psychological kind of mystery there. So, and when you start to ask about the mover of the hand, you can break the mover into different aspects as well. In other words, when I asked you to move your hand, first you had to choose whether you were going to do it or not, and you all did, which was good. But second, you had to choose how you were going to do it. And you all chose a unique way to move your hand. You had to choose, how am I going to move my hand? You could move it, like make a shaka, or you could make a fist, or you could do any kind of thing with your hand. But then from the movement of your hand, there's a feedback loop between moving your hand and experiencing the movement of your hand. So that's a part of the mover as well. Besides the chooser and choosing how to move it, there's this other part of you that's the experiencer of the movement of your hand. And then I was thinking there's even this other part through this process of moving that we start when we were really young to now. We learn how to move our hands in different ways. We have some grandchildren now, and it's neat to watch them growing from babies to infants to toddlers and so forth, and how they figure out how to move their appendages. They're real kind of jerky at first, but then as you develop skills in movement, you can do all these amazing things with your hands until you can become really creative in how you move your hands. You can become a painter or a pianist or a dancer, all these amazing ways that we can move our hands. So there are these two parts of our being, the mover and the moved. But then I was thinking, there's this other part of our being besides these two that I want to take a look at. And that is this thing called our sense of identity. And this sense of identity, and I like that phrase, sense of identity, it's like maybe even a sense, like our senses that we experience movement of our hand with, our sense of touch, our sense of sight. If we snap our fingers, we have sense of sound that go on. But we have this other thing called a sense of identity. And I was thinking what would be a good analogy for it. And I was thinking, have you ever seen those crabs that have one big claw and they run around sideways and they grab onto things? I think our sense of identity is like that crab with a big claw. And it moves around between our outer nature and our inner nature, and it grabs onto things, and we think that's who we are. We might think we are our name or our form or our role in the world, or we may think of ourselves as being the experiencer of that part of us that experiences the world, or the chooser, various aspects of our being we may think of. But I would like to pose that besides our sense of identity, there's this other part of us that is actually our real identity. And a lot of times our sense of identity is not connected with our real identity. And that's the conundrum, that's the challenge. But what is our real identity? And I think it's beyond both aspects of our being, the moved and the mover. It's this other part of us that's been with us our entire lives, but we often don't notice it because we're so busy. But having this coronavirus kind of helps us slow down so we can maybe notice it a little bit more. And a good word for it, I think, is that maybe you call it the witness. And this part of our being, I think, and we'd all agree, has been with us our whole lives. While both the mover and the moved changes, this witness part of us doesn't ever change. We in a certain sense, I think, at least I do, and I think all of you do too, feel that we're the same person from the time we develop a sense of self to now, but we've also changed in many ways, but there's this part of us, this core of us, that's never changed. And I like to think of it as the witness or the spectator or the perceiver. Those are another ways to think about it. It's the still point, like the still and moving center. This is the still point around which we move all the time. So I want to just kind of put that in perspective before we really look at pain and pleasure, because a lot of times we confuse who we are, our sense of identity, with outer things. But I think it's possible to go beyond pain and pleasure by moving this crab-like sense of identity further and further to this abode where our real identity lies inside us, a part of us that is changeless when we're dealing with all this change. And so that's, I think, the goal of trying to go beyond pleasure and pain, is to be able to abide in our witness identity. But that's easier said than done. And so what I rely on to try and help me kind of do that, moving of my sense of identity away from outer things to this more still center, is I rely on this little book. called that I call the Bhagavad Gita. So this is my tool for that task of trying to, center myself in my deeper nature and go beyond pleasure and pain. So I'd like to just tell you about this book. And first, I'd like to tell you a story about when my daughter and I went to India. She was going to be part of a non-governmental organization, a Gandhian organization in the far desert of Rajasthan with the villagers out in the desert, helping them with water resources and so forth. And I took the opportunity to go with her. And we flew from Newark, New Jersey to Mumbai, a long flight. And I had this little book in my carry-on baggage. But when we got on the plane, I noticed the whole plane was full. And we were the only Howleys, the only white people on the plane. Everybody else was from India. Everyone else was Indian. And so I was sitting across the aisle from this one Indian fellow, and we hadn't exchanged words at all. And he leaned over to me just after we got off the ground, and he just leaned over to me and he asked me this question. He says, "Have you ever heard of the Bhagavad Gita?" Just out of the blue. He didn't say anything about his name or anything. He just, "Hi, I'm so-and-so." He just said, "Have you ever heard the Bhagavad Gita?" And I go, and I thought maybe he had ESPA because I had the Bhagavad Gita in my carry-on. But I said, "Yes, I've read that book." And he goes, "Well, that's not a religious book." And I go, It's not a religious book?" He goes, No. In his Indian dialect, he goes, "That is not a religious book. It's a science book." And I go, "Oh, really? It's a science book?" And he goes, "Yes, it's about the science of living." And so I go, "Oh, this is going to be a very interesting trip to India if it's starting right like this." But I agree with him. I think this little book for me has been a lot about experimenting with through life and using life as kind of a laboratory for the science of living. So the background of the Bhagavad Gita is it's part of a great epic story. India has two great epics, just like Greece has two great epics. Their epics from Homer are the Odyssey and the Iliad. But the great epics of India really outdo the epics of Greece by a long shot. They're huge. They're many, many volumes. And Renee has a great favoritism or love for the epic of the Ramayana. And so every year, the Still and Moving Center does a presentation of the Ramayana at the festival of Diwali. The Ramayana is written by this great sage, Valmiki. The other great epic of India is the Mahabharata. And in the middle of the Mahabharata, or maybe it's actually more toward the end, you find the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita takes place when these two parts of the same family, they're all part of the same family, two kingdoms that are all interrelated, end up having a great war with one another, the Mahabharatan War. And so before they have this war, when there's millions of warriors on both sides of the battlefield, this great warrior, Arjuna, asks his charioteer, who is the great being Krishna, to take him out into the middle of the battlefield so he can survey all the warriors on both sides before he engages in this battle. I'm gonna take a sip of water. So,
Raj has it.
Oh, there it is, right there. So, as they go out into the battlefield, Arjuna looks across, and what he sees on the other side of this battlefield, he sees his relatives, and he sees his friends from when he was growing up, and he sees all his teachers who taught him all the great arts of war and the various things. He sees them on the other side, and he realizes these are the people that I'm going to have to kill. And he breaks down in tears. He steps off the chariot and kneels down and tells Krishna, I cannot do this battle. And he goes into what is called the doubt of Arjuna, or his despondency. And it's not because he's going to experience any pain. It's because as a great and amazingly powerful warrior, he's going to inflict a lot of pain. And he doesn't want to inflict all this pain on his relatives and his teachers and so forth. And he just simply says, I can't do it. This can't be right for me to cause all this pain, especially to people I know, and I refuse to fight. So then the rest of the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, that's chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, is the despondency of Arjuna. The remaining 17 chapters is Krishna's persuasion as to why he must fight, irregardless of all the suffering and pain that this war is going to cause. And so Krishna, in doing this, in this dialogue between the two, basically he's saying that his teaching is basically about this idea of dharma, that he must do his duty as a warrior, as a kshatriya. But the important thing is how to do that duty. So in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's these amazing few paragraphs that you find, which have been put together in like a grouping of the dialogue, which is often called the self-governed sage. And it really, these passages talk a lot about pain and pleasure and Krishna's view on how to go beyond pain and pleasure. Mahatma Gandhi, when he was in India, he really wasn't interested in Hinduism at all. It was not until he went to law school in England that he got really drawn toward Indian philosophy and teachings. And he was introduced to the Bhagavad Gita while he was a law student in England. And he was really drawn to these particular passages about the self-governed sage when he was in England. And then he memorized it. And from then on, from what I understand, he would recite these passages to himself every day for his whole life about the self-governed sage. And so here's how these passages start. It's obviously two men talking to each other, so it's in the male gender, but it applies to all genders, the dialogue. But I'll kind of review it with how it's said with these two men talking to each other. So first Arjuna says, "What, O Krishna, is the description of that wise and devoted man who is fixed in contemplation and confirmed in spiritual knowledge? What may such a sage declare? Where may he dwell? Does he move and act like other men?" So what's this sage being like? But you notice Arjuna is kind of trying to figure out these more external aspects of him. And Krishna goes right for the heart when he answers his first sentence. Krishna says, "A man is said to be confirmed in spiritual knowledge when he forsaketh every desire which enters his heart, and of himself is happy and contented in the self and through the self." Very, very mysterious first sentence that Krishna says in terms of his description of what a sage is. But I really like that one phrase about forsakes every desire which enters the heart. And what does that mean for a desire to enter the heart? It usually has something like a desire for pleasure, I think is maybe what he's meaning, or a desire not to experience pain. But if we can forsake those desires to avoid pain or experience pleasure, that's a big step toward moving toward becoming more like a self-governed sage. He goes on to describe this sage as being kind of like a turtle, who the turtle can draw in its limbs and into its shell. Krishna says that this wise being can draw in his senses, can retract his senses from the world. And then he goes into the study of what happens when we become too attached to the outer world through our senses, and how it can become a really dangerous downward path or downward spiral. And he says, let's see how it goes. It goes, "He who attends to the inclination of the senses," he who gives too much attention to his senses and the pain and pleasure that they bring into him, He who attends the inclination of the senses, in them hath a concern. In other words, we get attached to our senses and to pleasure and pain. In them hath a concern. And then from this concern is created passion. If we get too focused on our, the outer world of pain and pleasure, we develop passion for that world of pain and pleasure. But if we do get this attachment to the outer world and develop this passion in our nature, then we have expectations of how things are going to work out. When we get disappointed, and when things don't go our way, we can often become angry. So that's what Krishna says then. From passion comes anger. And from anger, if you get in a state of anger because things didn't work out the way you expected them to, then your mind becomes very cloudy. And then Krishna says, from anger is produced delusion. We get this, our head becomes really clouded up and we become deluded. And from delusion becomes a loss of memory. In other words, our sense of self, a sense of identity is no longer deep inside where our true identity is, but we become deluded and our sense of identity is more with outer things. And so we become from pain, from passion, anger. From anger is produced delusion. From delusion is a loss of discrimination. Loss of memory as to who we are. And then from loss of memory comes loss of discrimination. And when we get to this state, we can't tell right from wrong. We can't tell who we are from who we are not. I would say our current president is kind of in this state. That's my own opinion. But from there, from loss of discrimination, Krishna says, then there is loss of all. So this is the downward spiral by being way too attached to the world of pleasure and pain. But then Krishna says, there's another way. And he says, but he who free from attachment or repulsion experience objects through the senses with his heart obedient to his will attains to tranquility of thought. And this tranquil state attained therefrom shall soon result a separation from all troubles. And with his mind being thus at ease, fixed upon one object, he embraces wisdom from all sides. So, that he who free from attachment or repulsion, attachment to pleasure and repulsion from pain, can reach this state of equanimity, inner equanimity and tranquility of mind. And I think in there, what Krishna is saying is how one goes beyond pleasure and pain. So the book really, as it goes through these other chapters, he persuades Arjuna that you shouldn't be thinking in terms of choosing whether to do actions or not as to whether they're going to have anything to do with pain or pleasure, but whether or not they're your duty. And you have to ask yourself, is this something that is in something I ought to do as part of my duty? And figuring out what one's duty is really, really hard. But a quote that I heard once that really helped me in this regard is, the work at hand has the abstract claim of duty. So don't be thinking about some huge thing. It's the thing right before you that you ought to do. That's your duty. And that will lead to a deeper and deeper understanding of one's duty. But you can't, it's not just doing your duty that Krishna says is the path, the inner path. It's through doing your duty, but then renouncing all fruits of that come back, both good and bad, from doing one's duty. Renouncing the fruits of action is also a big part of this teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. So it's a lovely book. It's my guide. It's been my guide for at least 40 years, and it's never let me down. I really like what this whole idea of doing gems from the wisdom tradition. This is definitely a gem from the Hindu tradition. And one of my favorite quotes that seems to be also like a little gem of wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita goes like this. It is, seek this wisdom by doing service by strong search, by questions, and by humility. The wise who know the truth will communicate it unto thee, and knowing which thou shalt never again fall into error. So there you go, a little view on the Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you so much, Cliff. That was wonderful. I have lots of questions, and I do just want to make the one observation that the person that Krishna was speaking to on the battlefield in the portion of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita, a warrior named Arjuna, you made the comment that he was not at all fearful of pain himself. And what he was hesitant about was inflicting it upon someone else, upon many others, in fact. And I wonder if that distinction didn't make him more susceptible to hearing and understanding and actually drawing forth the teachings that he was given. So before asking Cliff to answer that question, I wanted to let anyone else make a comment or a question after this really fine presentation that you gave. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Cliff and everyone.
I'm Maurice.
It was a very good presentation, and I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about how Gandhi used self-suffering, which could look like inflicting pain on others through, but in compensation for injustice, and how we can use pain and pleasure for education of others non-violently.
Gosh, that is a tremendous question, a wonderful question.
Can you rephrase?
Can you say it again? How can we use self-suffering for the education and maybe the aid and uplift of others? Maybe something like that, Maurice? Can you go back to it?
Yes.
That is one of the, I think one of the secrets of Gandhi's movements, his nonviolent movements of ahimsa, was not to inflict pain on others, but to swallow, to take on pain, to take on suffering, to wake people up, I think, really, and to make change through that approach. There's this great Indian tradition of the idea of tapas, which is to take on suffering for the welfare of others. I would really like Veena to weigh in on this. She's studied Gandhi so much. Veena, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, hi, Cliff. That was a lovely presentation, and this is a great question. So I think the pleasure and pain, I think I like the way you differentiated pain and suffering and pleasure and happiness. And I think that is very important distinction when we study Gandhi. So for him, self-suffering was not suffering. I'm writing a paper right now, Gandhi's views on death and dying. And it's pretty ominous in today's world when the COVID is going on. And I happen to have this project was, several months ago, I was given this chapter to write. And I'm writing on the fear of death and how he speaks about I just have it in front of my computer, the brave meet death with a smile on their lips. So the self-suffering is not suffering for him. It is the equanimity. What he's doing it is through being the witness to that suffering. If you're really suffering at that time, he called it self-suffering because there's no better term for it. But it is really for his followers and himself, was that transcending that emotional attachment to the suffering. The pain, yes, the body's been inflicted with pain, but he didn't want to go to the emotional response of suffering, if that makes sense. So I think there comes the pleasure and pain, right? The transcending both. It's not, pain is also a incorrect Sanskrit, right? It is what kind of pain are we talking about? Pain is somebody slaps me, that's the pain. But how I react to that is emotional response to that suffering, how I felt. So even though what he wants is people to, and it seems very cold and cold-hearted when I was reading his views, his child's death, he goes, oh, you should not cry on your child's death. You should just stay equal in pleasure and pain. It seems so, if you tell somebody, my colleague, they'll say how hard-headed or hearted he is, but he's not talking about the grievability of that person, but he's talking about this mental state, and which is very difficult. Like you said, it's a constant practice and constant thinking about it. And it requires deep study and deep self-reflection, as you said. Thank you.
You, good to see you.
Does someone else have another thought on this question of Maurice's that was so helpful, Veena, in terms of transcending the emotional feelings that go along with pain, which cause suffering, and to get to a state of equanimity? And so just other thoughts on the question?
Well, I could just, for folks who are not familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, it would seem to me to be important to emphasize that that the battle that Arjuna is facing is an allegory, right? And the fact that, his uncles, his friends, his teachers are on the other side it's allegorical in the sense that those are aspects of himself, right? That's part of the mystery of the Bhagavad Gita, is that both sides are parts of the human constitution, on both sides of the battle, and those parts that we need to conquer, those are things within ourselves, right? So this is why Gandhi saw it as the Gita as really a manual of nonviolence, because when we're struck, or when we're let's say attacked in the performance of our dharma, which Gandhi of course had a very elevated view of what that meant in terms of social and political action, right? But if we're attacked, as was being mentioned, the first reaction is, I need to hit back, right? But that sense of wanting to strike back is part of what needs to be conquered in oneself, and that seems to be like key, in the sense that, again, if you go back to the allegory, is that even those who we see as being outside ourselves, or we see as the enemy, are really aspects of ourselves, right? And so if we, then this is just a very beginning point, but it's connected also with, Cliff, with what you said about the nature of the self, that one of the first responses that Krishna gives about the self-governed sage. He's happy and contented in the self. What is that self? It's that self of all creatures, right? It's that sense of underlying unity, that one is not separate from the other, and that which one needs to do battle with is really those those lower emotions, that sense of separateness, within us which wants comfort and only, or something for oneself, a desire for oneself only. So those are just a few thoughts.
Thank you. Let me call on Robert Moore, who's signing in from Santa Barbara.
Yeah, well, Kirk was from Santa Barbara too. Cliff, thank you very much for your presentation. I was struck by your description of the sense of self, like another sense, right? Just like our eyes and ears and the rest of us, our sense of self is analogous. And so it's a vehicle for perception. Like we see light with the eyes and sound with the ears. But isn't it pleasure and pain, suffering and happiness, aren't those all, those are the perceptions, aren't they, of the sense of self? And so I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that personal sense of self and how that may be a key to understanding pleasure and pain.
Yeah, I don't know why I kind of started really thinking a lot about this phrase, sense of self. But in thinking about pain and pleasure, you feel like a lot of times the sensory experiences, they pull you outside, and they pull this sense of identity out with it. So I started really kind of thinking that we have this element of us, this sense of identity that a lot of times is moving around. It's moving from within, without, and from without, within. And it's shifting around a lot of times based upon the experiences that we're having, like pain and pleasure. But it doesn't seem that what we often think of as ourselves is really ourselves. So it's how do we kind of release the claw of this crab of sense of self and get it to go back to where it's supposed to be, which is in our true self, instead of being always fixated in the outer aspects of our being or in the world. And that's through, I think Krishna is saying a lot, is renunciation of the fruits of action is one way to do it, and just not giving a sense of reality to parts of ourselves that we really know aren't really real. Like, I know my name really isn't Cliff Tillotson. It's just something that's been given to me. We all have names that we have to use. It's kind of like Shakespeare saying, all the world's a stage and the play's the thing. And we have all these roles and all these exits and entrances to go in. And our sense of self moves through these. But at the same time, we know that we're not really those. We got to be vigilant in not letting ourselves get tricked into thinking that we really are the roles we play or any other aspects of our self that are in the realm of what's changing all the time. There's a part of us, and we all intuit this, I believe, that is changeless. And we need to, as often as we can, within reason, remember that and return to that.
Cliff, you've done a lot of marathon running, and I couldn't handle all that stuff, but you can. How do you handle pleasure and pain when you're on the 32nd mile of some marathon run?
I think that's why Renee asked me to do this talk, is because I tend in my life, I've done these ridiculously painful things, unnecessarily painful things. But I guess, they say, some endurance athletic events, you can get an endorphin high or something like that. But also, I've found for myself, just exercising in nature in kind of a endurance kind of way isn't also a way to gain a little bit of detachment. You're pretty aware that while you're going through all this kind of arduous activity, that there's another part of you that's not. And so you feel that you kind of have a sense of that part that's just watching you make a spectacle of yourself, or it's like, and I think sometimes that part of you might be asking that question too, is, okay, why are you doing this? But I think sometimes when you're going through tremendous or reasonable amount of outer hardship is one of the times that you can most easily or most best experience this witness, this deeper perceiver, this stiller part of us at the same time. It's like this juxtaposition of the outer moving part with the still inner part of you one. So I guess that's why I do those stupid things, Maurice.
I just wanted to know the secret.
Everybody has their own way of going about it.
No, the secret of how you can make it through.
Oh, the secret of how to make it through. By not getting caught up in that part of you that's hurting. Basically. But watching this show, Call the Midwife, it's a cool show to watch that way. That women going through labor, some of them are going through tremendous pain, but you also get a sense that they'll make a joke, or you have a sense that while they're going through bringing another human being into the world, they are also in the experience but detached from the experience. That's often comes through in these shows. So I don't know, it's part of the mystery of life. We're multifaceted, multidimensional beings.
Cliff, if I could just add to the question and make it a little more difficult on you.
Do so, please.
It seems like it's sort of a different category when you're talking about physical pain. And because, I don't know, maybe it's the mind is more easily detached from physical pain than emotional pain. So, and all of us have probably had experiences where, for one reason or another, circumstances, someone says something, someone acts in a way that you find very offensive or that's very hurtful, and there's an emotional wave like that overcomes one, or that takes over the psyche. And those states are really, it seems those are really hard to get transcendence on, really hard to detach and see them, from a calm perspective, right? Because it's like the whole nature is like fiery. So we're wondering if you have any suggestions about, and maybe there's an allegory in terms of the experience of physical pain as well, and physical training, self-training. But we're just wondering if you have any suggestions about how, when you're in that turbulence, how do you gain perspective? And just to add to it, it also seems like there's a kind of blindness that goes along with it, right? Like when we're angry, we don't really see how irrational we're being. We don't get it, right? And so we may respond in ways that we regret, later, or do things that we wouldn't do in a normal, state of mind. So I was just wondering if you have suggestions about how to, shift gears when you're in that state. How do you shift gears?
I've been actually thinking about that question a little bit recently, and as I went to sleep last night, I read a phrase in the Bhagavad Gita about being free from enmity, being free from anger towards others. And actually yesterday, I kind of got angry at somebody, and I was surprised. I was I was able to watch the anger and study it while I was experiencing it and realizing how hard it was to shake off. I thought I was being unfairly judged by this other person. And so I felt anger come up in my being, like, how dare they judge me like that? They are wrong, you know, and I got offended. But again, I think my sense of identity attached to a part of me that wants to feel like I do good stuff, you know, I'm not doing bad stuff or whatever. And someone to say that I'm doing something that's not right offended me and made me angry. But at the same time, fortunately, I was able to watch the process. So I think a lot of times it's what we do before we get into a situation like that that allows us to weather those emotional waves better. If we do the preparatory work of trying to move our sense of identity away from any outer aspect of ourselves, even our emotional nature, our mental nature, and really just be that perceiver and the watcher, it gives us time so we don't react. It gives us an opportunity to be aware of the emotions that are flowing through us, possibly anger, because that's downward spiral that Krishna talks about in the self-governed stage. Doesn't necessarily happen to happen over a long period of time. It can happen in just seconds. We can go from, you know, anger to delusion to, you know, loss of discrimination very quickly, and then punch somebody or something, you know. So I would say that my feeling is that that's why we have to make these efforts to always regularly try and return to our true nature, so that when we're in the world, we're not so much of the world, we're more detached as we're actually in the world too, so we don't react, you know, and we can take those 3 to 10 breaths and then do a more appropriate response, because you never know when you're going to get, you know, hit from the side, you know, and things come, especially now I feel with the virus stuff. And now that we've all been dealing with it for so many months now, a lot of people are getting more edgy, I've noticed. 2 things I've noticed. One thing I've noticed is I'm making a lot more deep eye contact with people, which I find to be so wonderful. The mask doesn't cover the eyes. So I'm feeling like a lot of times when I've gone to India or Costa Rica or more, you know, I don't know, cultures like that, people like to make eye contact, but in the United States, not so much. We don't really like it. We feel uncomfortable making eye contact. But now I'm finding, I go to Home Depot or something and that person at the cashier is looking me more deeply in the eye. And I think that's a good thing coming out of all of this, is that we're willing and desirous to make more deep eye contact. But also at the same time, I'm noticing people are a little more afraid, a little more high-strung maybe, and might react and do something that they wouldn't have done before. So it's a good question, you know, because we're all going to have, you know, situations of conflict, confrontation, and it's how we deal with them in the moment. But if we do that preparatory work, we can almost in some ways sometimes slow down time, take those breaths, and not react, and yet do a creative response. That's the art of daily living. That's the science of the Bhagavad Gita, is the science of living.
A few weeks ago, for her presentation on A Mother's Insight, Mary Bird, who's with us, gave us a little window into the way she lives her life and her reliance on Mother Mary, in the same way you're talking about, you know, using this text from Krishna. And I loved the way that she faced this huge sink full of dirty dishes that had been packed in by all the other members of her house who weren't washing them, and that were left there at the end of the night. And So, Mary, how do you gain that detachment to not grumble over those? It must be.
Oh, it's been years of work, years of work, years of prayer, and just accepting it. I liked what Cliff was talking about, the suffering, because the saints in the Catholic tradition will embrace the cross, and they don't feel the pain. They're just feeling they're closer to the Lord. So I like that when we are digging deeper into ourselves, we kind of do give way. You know, the outer stuff has to go away. It's because it's a distraction, and what good is it? And so anyway, just do what you do to not hurt anybody and take care of yourself, and just spread the love.
You've been studying the Bhagavad Gita for a while. Do you have any reflections that you could share?
Yeah, so, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
So I thank you, Cliff, for that. That was so beautiful. And I love how you shared the tapasya, austerities, or, self-discipline. And I feel like going through pain and pleasure, one of my teacher, Ramdas, say that keep doing stuff that will challenge you mentally. Like tapasya is one of those in their ancient times, like, because that's when the mind gets stronger, like through fasting, through different times. Like the yogis and sadhus did a lot of tapasya to reach that enlightenment. And I think that, yeah, that's one of the things that we can practice that will help us into our journey of, going through our body. First, the physical body, controlling the physical body, and then we have the mind, which is with our emotions. We have to control it, and knowing that we are more controlled by the Atma, the higher self that really resides within us. And then higher than that is the Paramatma, the Lord within our hearts. So, yeah, that's mine. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Lord within our hearts, you're identifying as our true self.
I think Paramatma is the Lord within our hearts, which is higher than ourselves. And then Atma is the true self, our soul, which is in Atma is referred in the Gita as our soul. But there is something higher than that according to the tradition of Bhagavad Gita or the teachings of the Gita, which is the Paramatma. And they call it Krishna. In some different different spiritual cultures, they call it different names.
Anybody encountered situations recently where it would be helpful to overcome these feelings that wash over of either intense pleasure or intense pain, probably most likely on the psychological level for most of us?
Yeah, I could share a recent experience maybe just last week that Cliff reminded me of. I was very upset at work and found myself just in a rage, taking it out on the broom as I was sweeping and ignoring customers and just going through my process. And at the same time observing this rage, when a young couple said, "Excuse me, could you help us?" And it was as though all of that angst and anger just simply melted off of me. And I was watching this all happen, and I even get tingles now just observing how quickly it all dissolved in the face of doing what I love to do, which is to help people. And that's exactly like they were angels that came to me and said, let me release you from your pain by returning you to who you really are. It was magnificent.
Great story.
Yeah, that's a great comment.
Earlier, the conversation shifted, but I was thinking about the notion of embodiment is how the true nature, our spiritual self, gets to grow through the experiences of being a human and doing stupid things like marathons or jumping off a mountain with a kite on your back, things like this, and also getting into upset. These are the experiences that give us contrast, that allow us to grow. So I don't think they're stupid at all. I think embodiment is a great thing. It's a great learning tool.
Jim, were you about to ask something or contribute something?
No, I've been enjoying it immensely. I have to say, I'm always amazed. I'm always confident and certain that Cliff is going to say something really interesting and insightful. And I was by no means disappointed. In fact, it's the original way he goes from having you move a hand to talking about the witness. That was quite a remarkable series of moving back, and it really was helpful. It was really very, very interesting, Cliff, honestly. You just said some truly wonderful things, and I love the way you related it to the Gita. And listening, and as I listened, just a couple of thoughts came to mind. And with respect to Gandhi and self-suffering, Maurice's a very good original question. It seems to me that the suffering that most of the time Gandhi was speaking of is really moral suffering. It's the willingness to honor truth non-violently. And if, to take the dramatic example that we all think of, if you resist violent attacks because you're standing for justice, or you're trying to resist injustice, right? So that's a moral, you're both dealing with something that you consider not to be morally right, unjust treatment. You're also trying to uphold the truth of what you believe to be just in your response. But I think also what is involved there is Gandhi's not at all worried about someone suffering because you engage in self-suffering. If you think about it, when someone does violence to someone, they believe that what they're doing is right somewhere, or worse, they're indifferent. By self-suffering, you're making it visible to them, according to Gandhi, the harm that they're doing in pursuing their truth. They don't consider the consequences of their actions. By your taking the suffering and the pain that you're experiencing, which is real psychologically, they see that at some point you hope they will realize, however right they might be, what they're doing is not honoring their truth. It's dishonoring it. And furthermore, if they're indifferent, hopefully it'll awaken somewhere some spark of conscience at some time, because he's not against people. He wants, because we resort to violence, we've forgotten what is right. Now, furthermore, I think it also makes it very credible. The person that's suffering, you better believe what you're suffering for, because it's not easy to take suffering from someone, pain being inflicted by someone else when you think they're wrong. You've got to really believe in your truth and believe in the dignity of the other person before you can endure that kind of suffering. So it brings credibility on both sides. It helps to make it, the consequences more visible to the unjust action of the other people, and it also makes you stronger in your conviction. Plus, I love the final fact that Gandhi makes. It could be you're wrong. So this protects, you're taking the suffering on, protects the fact that you could be wrong. And it's better for you to be suffering than to cause suffering and later on discover that you're wrong. So it has multiple facets, I think, to it, don't you? So it just seems a really rich concept, a really rich idea.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. That we will use as a closing remark. Very insightful way for us to close this session on overcoming pleasure and pain. We have a lot to look forward to, and we want to thank Cliff for initiating a really fine discussion today, and thank all the rest of you for participating. Thank you all.
Thank you, Cliff.
It was fun. Hi, Gita.
Thank you, Cliff, for doing a great job.